I can't see anybody yet, but it is really nice to see your names. I'll wait until I can see you to start here. Henny, I hope you can hear me. It's really lovely to see your name. Hi, Brent. My dad took the dog on a walk today, Brent, and he commented on how much he enjoys your sign. So I just wanted you to know that. No, I know you can't talk. I'm just relaying the message. Hello, Rachel. All right, we will begin with Mincha on page 214 or page 226 or page 558. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יעלו חסלה, שם שכחלה, שם שאדוני אלוהיו, תהילה לדוד עמך. מלכותך מלכות כל עמים, ומשלתך בכל דור ודור, שמח לכל נפלים, וזוקף לכל כפופים, הנה כל חסד. פותח את ידיך, מסביר לכל רצון, צדיק נר בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו, תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם גושל לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברכיה, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, ובא לציון, גואל השם ושם יעקב, נאמנה אדוני ורתי. ואתה קדוש יושב תהילות ישראל, וקרא זה על זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות, מלוך על הארץ, כבודו, מכל עדן. ותישאני רוח, ואשמע אחרי קורש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, נתתני רוחה, ושמעת בתרי. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני אברהם, יצחק וישראל ותהי שמות. אדוני צבאות עמנו, וסללנו וכסל, אדוני צבאות שלום בטח. ברוך לנו שברך כבודו, ויגאלנו מן הטועים, ונתן לנו תורה תמת בחיי, ונתן בתוכנו בית. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר. Moving right along to the Torah service, a quick hop, skip, and a jump over to over to a Chumash. If you are in the Eitz Chaim, just give me 1 second while I put this siddur down. We are going to be reading Vezot HaBracha, which is a very unique chance to read Vezot HaBracha because this is the only time we will read it until we actually read it on Simchat Torah. So it is, except for obviously daily readings, but it's the last time that we will read it on a Shabbat for us to be able to hear these words. And some years we don't even get a Shabbat to read it. So it's a very unique opportunity. It is the last parsha of the Torah. So also a very inspiring read. We are going to be on page 1202. If you are in just a regular Bible, it is chapter 33, verse 1. And the first aliyah will be verses 1 through 7. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Vezot habracha asher berech Moshe ish Elohim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto vayomer Adonai misinai ba v'zarach miseir lamo hofia mehar paran ve'ata mirvevot kodesh Mimino eshtat lamo av chovev amim kol kedoshav beyadecha vehem tuku l'raglecha yisa midberotecha Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov vayihi bisharun melech behit asef roshei am yachad shiftei Israel יחרבן ועל ימות ויהי מיטב מספר וזאת ליהודה ויאמר שמע אדוני קול יהודה ואל עמו תביאנו ידיו רב לו וזר מצריו תהיה. You probably noticed the words Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha kehilat Yaakov. That's where they come from. Second Aliyah, verses 8 through 12. וללוי אמרtu מחברך לאיש חסידך אשר ניסית במסע תריבהו על מי מריבה האומר לאביו ולאמו לא ראיתיו ואת אחיו לא הכיר ואת פניו לא ידע כי שמרו אמרתך ובריתך ינצורו יורו משפטיך ליעקב ותורתך לישראל ישימו כתורה באפיך וחליל על מזבחך ברך אדוני חילו ופועל ידיו תרצה מחץ מותניים קמיו ומשנאיו מן יקומון לבנימין אמר ידיד אדוני ישכון לבטח עליו חופף עליו כל היום ובין כתפיו שכן. It's a really beautiful idea of resting between God's shoulders like a child on top of his parents' shoulders. Last Aliyah, verse 13 through 17. וליוסף אמר מבורכת אדוני ארצה ממגד שמיים מטל ומתהום רובצת תחת וממגד תבואת שמש וממגד גרש ירחים ומראש הרי קדם וממגד גבעות עולם וממגד ארץ ומלואה ורצון שוכני סנה תבואתה לראש יוסף ולקודקוד נזיר אחיו בכור שורו הדר לו וקרני ראם קרניו בהם עמים ינגח יחדיו אפסי ארץ והם רבבות אפרים והם אלפי מנשה. Give me 1 second as I put this aside and get the Siddur. Again, if you have a moment to be able to read that parsha between now and Simchat Torah, it's a parsha that is extremely beautiful and yet does not always get as much attention as it deserves because Simchat Torah is always such a crazy time. So if you can read it before, I think it will only enhance your time before Simchat Torah begins. The Amidah is said silently in a whisper. The page numbers are page 223, page 234, or page 574. Just remember that we are still in Shabbat Shuvah because it is still Mincha. So do those modifications or those additions as you see them. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We will come together with the small paragraph at the top of page 230. It's right before Kaddish Shalem, which in the other Sidurim is on page 247 or 596. It says, Katcha Sedek Le'olam, V'Tortcha Emet, V'Yizkadcha Elohim, Ad Marama Asher Asetu V'Gala. Adamu V'Ema Toshia Adonai. Aleinu, page 231, 248, or 598. Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol, L'Tidul L'Yitzer B'Shish L'Atzah V'Yirah. V'Anachnu Korim V'Mishtachavim U'Modim L'Fnei Melech HaMelachim L'Elokim HaKadosh. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Though it says we have 9 participants, I know that one person is not there, and Larry is telling me there's 2 people. Marlise is Gary's there. Okay, great. Okay, we have enough. Marlise and Gary, would you like to unmute to lead us in Kaddish? Great. So we're on page 232 or page 249 or page 600.
Okay. Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'Alma Divra Kirutei V'Amlich Malkatei V'Chayachon V'Yomechon V'Hiei Dehol Beit Yisrael V'Agala V'Zman Kari V'Yamru Amen.
Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Lomei Almaya.
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Lomei Almaya. Yit Barak V'Yishtabach V'Yit Pa'ar V'Yit Ramav V'Yit Naseh V'Yit Hadar V'Talei V'Talal Shemei D'Kudsha B'Richu Leila Leila Mikol Birchata V'Shirata Tushbachata V'Nechamata Damiram Be'alma V'Yamru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabba Mishamaya V'Chaim Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Yamru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom V'Ramav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Yamru Amen.
Amen. And I will now turn it over to our rabbinic intern, Rachel.
Hello. Pleasure to be with all of you tonight. So I'm going rogue and not teaching on the Parsha this week, but rolling with the last moments of Shabbat Shuvah to think about one biblical character's road after where we leave him on Rosh Hashanah, Yitzchak, after we leave him in the story of the Akedah and Rosh Hashanah. Just as we're thinking about our journey between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I think the rabbinic thoughts on what may have happened to Isaac after the Akedah can be inspiring for us to think about our own Teshuvah journey in this season. So this was my inspiration in choosing to teach about something entirely different. So you can take off your Devarim hat, put it on the side for a moment, and get your Bereshit hat back on. So just as a recap from where we left off in the second day Rosh Hashanah reading, we know that Abraham was called, tested by God, supposedly to sacrifice his only son, and or his special one. We know that he had Isaac and Ishmael, but he was asked to sacrifice Isaac, and eventually the ram is provided instead. And then the last piece we hear about this story in Genesis 22 verse 19, which if you're looking at the source sheet is source 1a. It says, Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. But it's notable that Isaac is not mentioned at that point, and it's not actually clear that he ever speaks to his father at all in the Torah narrative after that situation. So understandably, there's been a lot of questioning in rabbinic commentary about what happened to him after that point. And it should also, just so you understand the time period that the rabbis are commenting on, the time period as in the gap in biblical time, whatever that biblical time actually means. We then hear about Isaac again several chapters later, and what is considered to be 3 years later, when it says that he was coming back from the vicinity of Be'er Lachai Roi. It says he was settled in the Negev. He went out walking in the field, and then he sees Rebecca approaching on the camel. They have this beautiful movie moment where their eyes meet, and she either falls off the camel or kind of like gracefully comes down off the camel, and they meet and they start their partnership together and carry the Jewish people forward. So the question that we're answering right now is what happened to him in between those two moments, in those 3 years, and presuming that he faced some trauma or lingering challenges from this moment, what might the healing journey have been so that he could get to a place where he could then meet his wife and carry on with his life. So we're going to look at 3 different ideas from 2 different commentators and think about if they make sense to us and how they might apply to our lives today. So my husband is here with me, and I might pick on him again to read. This is Andrew. So if you could read Chizkuni's thoughts on what happened to Yitzchak in the years after the Akedah.
That's me.
Source, yes, that's me.
And Abraham returned to his servants. Where did Yitzchak go? He was hidden in Gan Eden for 3 years, cited in Midrash Hagadol. A different interpretation, he went to study Torah during those 3 years in the Academy of Aver, in Bereshit Rabbah 56:11.
Great, thank you. So does anyone have thoughts, comments, just upon initially hearing these 2 ideas, that either he could have gone to Gan Eden for 3 years or gone to yeshiva for 3 years? Brant?
Look, if your dad tries to kill you, you're definitely not going home. So the question is, where are you going to go? So you're either entitled to some sort of respite in Gan Eden, or you're going to lose yourself in study. That's a kind way of looking at the mental trauma, by having yourself almost executed by the one that you love and then released from that. So clearly we know he's not going home after that. Why these 2? It could be many reasons, but whatever it is, he needs time to overcome the trauma.
Great, beautiful. So thank you, Brant, for naming that Gan Eden might be a piece that's kind of respite, a break from this traumatic situation, or losing himself in study. Does anyone else have other ideas about what he might have gained or benefited from or processed in either of these 2 environments? Backrax, is that a raised hand? I think you can unmute yourself if you're trying to answer.
Well, I don't think either one of them are possible. I mean, it sounds nice. That's too many rabbis in the world. But I just think he probably left. He left home, and I think he probably wandered the fields with his sheep and everything else, and just had time by himself, because that's, again, the trauma was significant. But I just don't think he was. It sounds nice he's at a yeshiva, and it's nice he went up to Gan Eden, which is not someplace where anybody can go to. But I just think he needed time by himself and to process what was happening. Right.
The rabbis have a tendency to kind of imagine their own life placed onto biblical characters. So yes, Rabbi Schatz. I think you have to unmute.
I just needed Kenji to unmute me. Yeah, I've always, and I'm sorry that I don't have the source sheet in front of me. Just one of those weeks where printing was a lot for Yom Kippur. So one of the things I've always thought about with this commentary was that maybe it's not similar to what Gary just mentioned. Maybe it's not the actual place, but maybe it's the frame of mind. So yes, maybe he didn't go to Gan Eden, or maybe he didn't study in a yeshiva all day, but maybe what he busied himself with to get that respite that Brand was talking about was to actually put himself in like a mindful, meditative maybe state, or to busy his mind and his thoughts with Torah. And the only reason I mentioned I don't have this source sheet in front of me is I'm sorry if I just gave something away that you're going in the direction of, but that has always been a way that I felt like he can still be in the picture. And I agree with Gary that neither are, I don't believe that he went to Gan Eden, but that you can always take yourself to a certain mindset or a certain place by putting yourself there in your mind or in your own frame of work or busyness.
Right, great. That we can think about them as two different internal states. That he had to find a place of safety to just physically feel enough comfort that he could move forward in his life. And, if you only dwell in a place of safety, it's hard to move forward. So that eventually he needed to busy himself with something, thinking, learning, pushing himself so that he could, start moving out of it. I studied this with a bat mitzvah student once. And when, at first she was like, it doesn't make sense for him to study at yeshiva because he's in the Torah. How could he have studied the Torah? And then she kind of thought, well, maybe he studied the Torah up until his own story and looked at his dad's life and tried to gain more understanding about his dad and why he might have done what he did. So I thought that was a fascinating and very generous read towards Avraham, thinking that the yeshiva idea might be him trying to find some kind of healing with his dad or healing with God even. Great. So there's one more kind of mentality mode, possible healing that we're going to peek at next. And this is what Ramban's thinking. It starts from a grammatical comment about in verse 22:19 up at the top of the source sheet. What's listed as 1b on the source sheet when he reappears to marry Rebecca. That it says, V'yitzchak ba mibo be'er l'chai ro'i, v'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. So Yitzchak ba mibo, it's kind of a repetitive, like he came from coming. And Ramban picks up on this, trying to say, first of all, he doesn't think that he was living in Be'er L'chai Ro'i. They're saying, oh, he came from coming back from Be'er L'chai Ro'i, as in, like if you went on vacation to some place we probably wouldn't go right now, but I came from coming to Florida to go, I arrived at your party after having come from Florida. I didn't live there, but that's like where I had stopped before I made my way to you. And so he ends up reading that verb form as saying it was a repeated action. And I don't know if, our current understanding of grammar, we would agree with this, but just to kind of roll with his rabbinic framework, that he thinks Be'er L'chai Ro'i was a place Yitzchak had repeatedly gone to and was essentially the last stop that he made before coming back to marry Rivka. And if we think back again, even further in Genesis, we saw Be'er L'chai Ro'i with Hagar, not in the story that we read on Rosh Hashanah, but another time that she escaped to the wilderness. She had more than one rough spot in her life. After she conceived Ishmael and Sarah started treating her harshly, she ran away to the wilderness, has this moment with God, where God provides her with a well to nourish her physically, spiritually, and says, it's okay, you can go back. And so that's kind of, if we think about what that place might have been, maybe after that there was a vibe or people kind of got the idea that if you go to this spot, there's this groovy God connection there. And if you think about the word itself, Be'er L'chai Ro'i, Be'er means well, L'chai is for the living one, and Ro'i is who sees me. And I think at least for Hagar, that is how that particular place functioned, that she was in distress, she encounters God and is seen and receives the sustenance that she needs. Okay, so that's kind of the context for what that place might have been. And then what Ramban is saying is Yitzchak was there just before coming back to marry Rebecca, and it was a place he had gone to multiple times. So maybe in that 3-year period, he had repeatedly gone to his, spiritual meditation center in Be'er L'chai Ro'i or something like that. And the last piece of what he writes that I have listed as source 3 is it was a place of prayer for him because of the appearance of the angel there, referring to the situation with Hagar. So, additional thoughts, questions on what he might have gained from that spot. Larry?
I have a couple of comments. I'll save the answer to your question for last. First of all, just a comment about going to Gan Eden way back there.
Yeah.
So Gan Eden was basically the origin, and that's where his father and his grandfather, who was already dead, and his great-grandfather came from. So maybe he went back to his father's home. I've never seen that explained, but it seems logical to me. Alter translates the phrase "ba mibo" as he had come from the approach to Ber Lahai Ro'i. So it's a geographical. He's coming from the road, from that direction, not from there, but from the road to the approach to. However, I think I can't claim this is original because I think I've heard this before. He was actually visiting Hagar, and basically Hagar adopted him. Is one midrash. Hagar readopted him after the death of Sarah, and he had already reconciled with Hagar and Ishmael, and he had gone to their household, is where he had gone, not as a rejection of Abraham, maybe, but more because he no longer had a mother, because Sarah is already dead. So she becomes his mother. So it's not simply that he goes there as a spiritual home; he goes there as an actual familial home. Is one possible interpretation.
Beautiful. There's so many midrashic layers to this, many pieces of this story. I think I read another one that said he was trying to bring Hagar back to his father in case he wanted to marry her again after Sarah died. So right, there's a lot of different ways of rabbis imagining that he's reconnecting with his roots and different pieces of this strained family line. So again, if we're thinking, it seems like there's lack of clarity in the rabbinic understanding from some of the wording and the story, like where did he physically go? But it seems like there is a trend of he wanted to go back to family that welcomed him, and he wanted to go back to understand his history, his past, and some of his roots. Yes, Andrew.
I had something about the way we were talking in this conversation had me thinking it makes sense that he was traumatized. And another possible read with this situation might be a near-death experience, would be a different psychological response. To think he came so close to being dead, and every moment he has after that is a gift, and not necessarily being traumatized as much, although you think he'd have to be from his father. But the idea of somebody who goes continually back to a place of prayer and stuff, that could be, well, anyway, I just thought that was like another way to read it, possibly.
As him recovering from a near-death experience, not just the trauma of.
Yeah, like if you get in a car accident, you could be traumatized for ages. And some people, they think, wow, I almost died there and I'm alive. And it gives them a whole new approach to life from what I've heard. Not that I've been through that before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're hearing the Ramban's opinion that he repeatedly went to pray at this well as kind of a.
It's sort of a life-affirming thing, going back to this place. And also going back to understand his fathers and things could be a life-affirming thing too. Or it doesn't seem weak or broken, or if he was broken, I'd expect him to be frozen and to do nothing as a common trauma response, but he doesn't do that.
Nice. And to just kind of roll with that. I mean, Gan Eden is the only of the options where I can really think he was sedentary. If you think about yeshiva, he probably would have been in community, or at least had one chavruta, theoretical chavruta. And at a well, I mean, a well is a gathering place. It's where a lot of people in the Bible meet their spouses. In this case, he didn't literally meet Rebecca there, like the Abraham's servant picked her up at a well. But I think there is a motif of a well being a place of connecting with community. So backracks.
I was just going to say that related to the story that Larry was telling, that it would make sense that after having this traumatic experience with his father, that he might be reaching out to other members of his family, in a way to get connection that way.
Right. Great. So if we have just a few more minutes to think about these teachings, we can kind of zoom back out, look at the 3 different modalities for healing processing that we've brought up in these different commentaries. The Gan Eden safety security idea, the going to yeshiva, busying yourself, learning, pushing yourself, maybe analyzing your own story mentality, and the going to a well or a spiritual place idea. So I bring these 3 moments for you, not because there's necessarily agreement or clarity about the path that Isaac took to be able to re-enter society and rejoin the story as we see it, but because I think these are three important ways to think about our own pathways in Teshuvah and entering this and beginning this new Jewish year. That there are times when we will need to find rest and safety. There are times when we will need to find a new skill, a new hobby, to grow, to find also a different kind of escape in learning and study. And I think that there will be times when we need to find a place that's both personally spiritual, but also a connecting point that if we take the Be'er L'chai Ro'i literally, like a place for you that feels like a well overflowing with life, overflowing with the feeling that your community or God or some power in the universe sees you just as you are. And that's an important piece of healing and growth also. So I wish for all of us that we find any or all of these spaces as we need them in the rest of our Teshuvah process and in the year ahead.
Sure.
Oh yes, a Gemar Chatima Tova.
We'll continue with Mariv, which begins on page 264. Rachel, are you going to lead us in Mariv?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so page 264 or page 281 or page 200.
Adonai Hoshia Hamelach Ya'anenu V'yom Koreinu. Umavir Yamu Mevi Laila, Umavdil Ben Yamu Ben Laila, Adonai Tzivahot Shemo, El Chai V'Kayam Tamidim Lochalenu Leolam Va'ed, Baruch Ata Adonai Hama'ari V'Aravim, Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael. Ve'ahavatcha al tasim imanu le'olamim, Baruch Ata Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael, El Melech Ne'eman, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. Emet ve'emunah kozot. Umalchuto beratzon kiblu alehem, Moshe u'bnei Yisrael lechanu shira, b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nadar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef eleh, malchutecha ruvanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe, ze elianu v'yamru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'ne'emar kiped Adonai et Yaakov, u'ge'elohim yad chazak v'imenu, Baruch ata Adonai gal Yisrael. Ushmor tzeitenu vo'enu l'chaim u'l'shalom me'ata v'ad olam, Baruch ata Adonai shomer Yisrael la'ad. Ki המלכות שלך היא ולעולמי עד תמלוך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבוד, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ועל כל מעשיו. We are skipping Chatzi Kaddish and going to the Amidah at the conclusion of Shabbat, which begins on 270. or 286 or 210. And just remember to include both any of the changes between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and anything particular to the closing of Shabbat. Oseh shalom minama, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. You are still finishing your Amidah. Please continue at your own pace. We will conclude with the verses at the conclusion of Shabbat, which is, let's see, that will lead us to 279, 292, or 682. Just note that we are skipping Chatzi Kaddish. Yikra'eni v'enehu imavanochi v'tzara, achaltehu v'achabdehu, orachim b'mashviyehu v'arehu b'shuati, orachim b'mashviyehu v'arehu b'shuati. ואתה קדוש השם תהילות ישראל, וקרא זה ויאמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני במקומו. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר. Aleinu on page 281, 297, or 696. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adonai kol mitzvot. Bereshit. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Psalm for the days of awe, which is on 113 in Lev Shalem and 40 in the Sim Shalom. And hopefully, I don't have the page for the Slim Shalom, but hopefully by now everyone can find it. ודוד אדוני אויבי שימי מיראה. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני אותה אבקש, שבתי בבית אדוני כל ימי חיי, לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בהיכלו. לולא האמנתי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים, קווה על אדוני חזק ויאמץ ליבך וקווה על אדוני. We will conclude with Mourner's Kaddish. Rabbi Schatz, or do you want to call on anyone to lead?
The only people I see are the back racks again, if they would like to lead us again in Mourner's Kaddish. If there's someone who I can't see, excuse me, who is reciting Kaddish and would like to turn their video on, we're happy to have you lead us, but I don't see anybody else. All right, Marlise, why don't you lead us in Kaddish Yatom, which can be found on page 282, page 298, or page 698.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divra kirte v'yamlich malkute v'chayachon u'vyamechon u'bechei d'chol be'Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'yamru amen.
Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Lomei Almaya.
Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam u'olmei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit ramam v'yit naseh v'yit hadar v'yit talei v'yit halal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'yamru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you to all who helped lead, and wishing everyone an upcoming Shavua Tov as we close with Havdalah that begins on page 283, 299, or 700. Just because it's the end of Shabbat Shuvah doesn't mean that Teshuvah is ending, just Shabbat Shuvah. הנה אל ישועתי, אפתח ולא אחד, כי אותי ותמרתיה, אדוני ויהי לי לישועה, ושאבתם מים בששון, מן מדי הישועה, לאדוני הישועה, אדוני צבאות עמנו, משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני הושיע, המלך יעננו ויוקרנו, ליהודים חי טהורה, בשמחה וששון מקר, כן תהיה לנו, כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא מיני ושמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא האש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול. זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול, וככוכבים בלילה. זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול, והכוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו הנביא, אליהו הגלעדי. במהרה יבוא אלינו, מושיח בן דוד. במהרה יבוא אלינו, מושיח בן דוד. Shavua Tov to everyone, and I think that we are maybe just 1 minute over if you're going to zoom out.
Is it time yet?
Shavua Tov. Rachel, I just want to tell you two things. Number one, your Oseh HaShalom didn't go unnoticed. Thank you. Even though it's not in our Sidurim, it was a point of discussion at one of our minyanim this week.
Oh.
You remind me very much of another intern we used to have at Beth Am. I've only been there 4 years, but an intern who had a lovely, lovely voice. I don't know what became of her. It was a lovely teaching, and your davening is lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Toda rabah.
Hey, Rabbi